My husband and mother-in-law laughed and showed me a piece of paper. It had ridiculous things written on it, like giving the house to my husband and not complaining, and it even had my mother's signature on it. I immediately thought someone had tricked her into signing it. This was clearly a scam. When I asked about it, my mother calmly said, "Yes, that's my handwriting," without fully understanding the situation. We were then kicked out of the house, and I was handed divorce papers. My husband looked at me, hoping I would beg to stay with him. But I refused to look back, knowing he would eventually understand. As I clenched my teeth, my mother quietly said, "This is happiness." My name is Amy. I'm a 55-year-old housewife who works part-time. Lately, I've been dealing with severe hand eczema, but there's something that worries me even more. My mother's possible dementia. She hasn't been officially diagnosed, but her memory and judgment are getting worse. She often forgets things and sometimes can't even remember what she's forgotten. Her personality sometimes changes unexpectedly. Some days, these things happen a lot, while other days, she's perfectly normal. She used to be hardworking and attentive, but after injuring her knee, she mostly stays inside, and her condition seems to have gotten worse. Her knee is healed, but for safety, I don't want her going out alone. My father and I try to manage our daily lives while taking care of her. When I'm at work, my father watches over her at home to make sure she's okay. I'm worried about her symptoms getting worse and frustrated by my unhelpful husband. We need to make a plan for the future. One day, my father got seriously ill and needed to stay in the hospital for a long time, which made it impossible to leave my mother alone. I could afford to take some time off from work, so I talked to my husband about it. He acted like it wasn't his problem, saying, "You worry too much. Fires can start from small things, and she could get lost, but if you worry about everything, it never ends." My husband seemed really annoyed. We've lived with my mother for a long time, but his attitude this time was just too much. After all, the reason we're living with her is because my husband doesn't make enough money, and we're dependent on her. Even a bird knows to return a favor, so why doesn't he show any appreciation? Then he said, "Why don't you quit your job and take care of her?" But it's not that simple. Even though it's just a part-time job, I had no intention of quitting because the income is decent. It made me want to ask if he would support me if I quit. I told him, "I think we can continue as we have been, using care services and with your help." He responded, "Why me? It's your mother, not mine." I said, "That's true, but we're family. Shouldn't we handle this together?" But he said, "Her condition isn't even bad enough to need care services yet. And you've been complaining about your hand eczema and the pain from standing at your part-time job at the beauty salon. Just quit already." Then he left in a huff. His words hurt. Yes, I have hand eczema, but I never said I wanted to quit my job. It angered me that he belittled my work. I knew this moment might come, where he'd act like it's not his responsibility, but it still stung. We're family, and I thought about how I'd feel if his mother were in the same situation. It was frustrating, but there wasn't much I could do. I work part-time, so I have some flexibility, but thinking about the future, when my mother might need help with things like changing clothes or bathing, I worry. If I quit being a hairstylist now, it would be hard to return to the field later. Trends and chemicals in the industry change all the time, and keeping up would be difficult. I have clients who specifically request me, but there are many other hairstylists. However, only I can take care of my mother. Feeling down won't change anything, so I need to stay positive and keep moving forward. Once my father is discharged from the hospital, we should be able to return to our normal life. To make that happen, I plan to have my mother thoroughly checked at the hospital, have a serious talk with my husband, apply for home care services, and plan for the future. I really don't want to quit my job, so I plan to ask for some time off instead. But a few days after making that decision, my father, who was in the hospital, suddenly passed away. I couldn't believe it. When a relative dies, there's no time to mourn properly because there's so many things to do. Funeral arrangements and other procedures keep coming one after another. My mother was heartbroken, sometimes looking lost like a child and other times bursting into tears. But when she put on her mourning clothes, she changed completely, taking on her role as the chief mourner with dignity. I did my best to support her and stayed by her side the whole time. It all happened so quickly, but we were able to say goodbye to my father. For the first time, we truly felt the loneliness of his absence. We were both emotionally and physically exhausted. My father wasn't a talkative man, but I remember his kind heart. I know he's gone, but his chair, teacup, reading glasses, and the novel he was halfway through are still where he left them. Neither my mother nor I are ready to put these things away yet. At this time, my husband brought his parents over. He had mentioned earlier that he would bring them to help clean up the house. While I appreciated the thought, I wasn't ready for that yet. So, I decided to decline their help and just serve them tea before asking them to leave. My mother seemed very tired and soon started dozing off, so I wanted to let her rest. I led my in-laws to the dining room and prepared tea. My husband said, "Not tea, make coffee, and bring out something sweet." For a moment, I thought, "These are your parents. Why don't you take care of them?" But holding on to resentment is pointless. I've decided to live positively. My mother-in-law and husband suggested calling a service to dispose of the large items quickly. I wish they wouldn't make decisions on their own. I told them, "I'm sorry, but I'm not ready to clean up yet." My mother-in-law was surprised, but I explained, "My mother and I aren't emotionally ready yet. Let's postpone it for a little while longer." When I explained this, my mother-in-law looked doubtful and said, "That's troublesome. We can't do that." I didn't understand why it would be troublesome for her. I looked at my husband for his reaction, but he avoided my gaze. She then mentioned that the house had already been passed on to the eldest son and his wife, and that renovations were about to start soon. Confused, I asked, "What about where we will go?" My husband suddenly declared, "From now on, I'll live here with my parents." I was shocked and asked, "What are you talking about? This is my home." My husband wouldn't look me in the eyes. My mother-in-law then chimed in as if it were obvious. "Amy, didn't you know? I did tell you, but you probably forgot because you were busy with the funeral." My husband added calmly, "Everything has already been decided." I was in disbelief. There's no way I would miss such important information, no matter how busy I was. "You can't do this without my consent." My husband responded, "Your consent isn't needed anymore. It's already resolved." I asked, "What do you mean?" He replied, "I've already settled it with your mother." It felt like cold water had been thrown on me. When did this discussion even happen? Could it be that they decided this while my mother was not fully aware? This can't be allowed. I stood there, stunned. My mother-in-law then said to my husband, "You know, someone who has quit their job and an old person who needs lots of care can be a handful, right?" My husband nodded in agreement and said, "That's right. That's why you two need to leave this house, and preferably soon." I was too shocked by her words to even respond. Was she referring to my mother and me as someone who does nothing and an old person who needs care? Why do we have to leave? This is my parents' house. I pleaded, "Please take that back. This is my home, and my mother does not have dementia." But they just smiled, ignoring my words. My husband and mother-in-law then pulled out a document. "There's no taking it back. We've already got the signatures on paper." The document contained ridiculous terms like giving the house to my husband and not complaining, and it even had my mother's signature on it. I looked closely, and indeed, it was my mother's signature. I could only think it was a scam that forced her to sign. "This is completely invalid." I asked, "Did you make her sign this while she wasn't in her right mind?" "That's not valid." "What are you talking about?" "You just said she doesn't have dementia," my husband replied. Just then my mother, who should have been resting, suddenly appeared and greeted everyone cheerfully. "Hello, everyone. What brings you here today?" My husband quickly asked her. "This signature is your handwriting, right? You did sign here?" "Yes, this is my handwriting," my mother calmly confirmed. This was a despicable trick. My husband then said, "Now that you understand, pack your things and leave the house." "Impossible," I responded. "If you continue to stay here, I'll call the police for trespassing," he threatened. This situation was completely unreasonable. Without getting to the bottom of it, we were forced out of the house with a completed divorce form. My husband looked at me with a smirk, as if expecting me to beg or cling to him. I tried hard not to meet his eyes, holding back my anger. As we left, I wanted to take something of my father's with me, and I managed to grab a pair of his leather shoes. I remembered how much he cared for them. Though men's shoes might not be useful to me, it felt better than leaving with nothing. My mother and I got into the car and just started driving aimlessly. I was overwhelmed with anger at my husband and his parents, sadness over what I had lost, and a deep sense of despair about our future. It felt impossible to have hope. I couldn't stop my tears. Then my mother, who had been quiet, softly said, "This is happiness." Even after my father's sudden death and being forced out of our home, my mother expressed emotions opposite to mine. I wondered if she was confused. I felt a mix of complex emotions that I couldn't describe, and I had no words to reply. But my mother continued, "It feels refreshing. Unnecessary things naturally drift away, and you don't have any regrets, do you?" "But I do have attachments to my childhood home," I replied bluntly. My mother laughed and said, "That old big house is falling apart. Why do they even like it? It's hard to maintain and get rid of, but it's lucky that they're taking it off our hands." Her optimistic attitude surprised me. I wanted Dad to live longer. "What are you talking about? It was better this way." "I didn't want to see him sad," my mother said. I asked, "What about the furniture and appliances you liked and picked out? Aren't you sad to let them go?" She replied, "We can just buy new ones, that's the fun part." I was surprised and asked, "Aren't you upset about being called an old, senile person?" She calmly said, "That's a path everyone will follow." Even though I felt like we had lost everything, my mother was incredibly calm. It annoyed me because I thought she might forget all of this soon anyway. Then she said, "I'm truly happy when you're by my side. If you weren't here, maybe I would have followed your father." I tried to comfort her, saying, "Mom, don't worry, it's okay." She nodded and started dozing off again, her innocence reminding me of a child. I realized that as long as I could remember the things my mother forgot, we would be okay. Even though I wasn't fully recovered from everything, being with my mother made me feel like I could handle it. Right after that, I received a message from my husband. "If you beg me, I might forgive you. It shouldn't be a problem to put your mother in a facility." I was shocked. Forgive me? Did I do something wrong? It was clear they wanted to treat me like a maid. I didn't want to continue the conversation, so I just replied, "That's fine," and ended the call. After that, everything became clear. I realized I no longer needed my husband. I explained the situation to my part-time job and decided to become an independent hairstylist. Using my savings, I bought a small house in the next town. The house had been used as both a residence and a hair salon. The owner of my part-time job helped me arrange the purchase, and I got it for an unbelievably low price. It allowed me to work while taking care of my mother at home. The owner also supported me by helping with the equipment and renovations for the shop, saying, "Amy has supported us for a long time." Their kindness deeply touched my weary heart. I used up all my savings to open the salon, but I had no regrets. I had given up on owning my own salon because my husband was against it, but it was a dream I'd held for many years. Whether I would succeed or not was uncertain, but the excitement of new challenges outweighed any lingering anger towards my husband and his parents. I was determined not to look back. Finally, I opened my own hair salon, a dream come true. My mother helped with cleaning and laundry at the salon. She enjoyed gardening in her free time, and talking with the neighbors became part of our daily routine. It really helped that they promoted the shop. As my new life with my mother settled down, I found that the time I spent daydreaming also decreased. I received a message from my husband. "Why aren't you contacting me? I said I would forgive you, didn't I? Come back home immediately." I was confused and asked, "What are you talking about?" He replied, "Don't be stubborn when you're struggling," with a scoff in his voice. I tilted my head, wondering, am I really struggling? "Where did you hear that?" He continued, "I heard you opened your own salon. It's impossible for an older hairstylist to manage alone, especially with a mother with dementia. That must be tough." I couldn't believe he was making such baseless assumptions. In fact, I was doing much better financially than when I was working part-time. If there was nothing more to discuss, I told him I was going to hang up. Wait, he said. I want to return your father's belongings. Could you come to the house? The thought of my father's belongings caught my attention. I had hardly been able to take anything with me when we left, and though my mother had said memories were enough, I still wanted to keep whatever was left. I left my mother with a neighbor and headed back to my childhood home for the first time in a while. At that moment, I forgot how badly my husband had treated me and even felt a bit thankful. When I arrived, the entrance to my childhood home was a mess. Cardboard boxes were piled up, and mud and dead leaves were scattered everywhere. I was shocked to see the house so dirty, and my ex-husband came out from inside. "Hey, long time no see," he said. I replied, "I'm short on time. Please hand over my father's belongings quickly." "Come in and take them," he said. It had been a long time since I returned to my childhood home, and it was so filthy that I hesitated to even take off my shoes. Things were scattered everywhere, and he complained that his mother couldn't clean it up, as the wife of the eldest son used to do it in their previous home. I wondered why he wouldn't clean up himself. He was still as lacking in compassion as ever, but that didn't concern me anymore. I had no attachment left to this house, which had been ruined by others. What used to be the living room was now where my ex-husband slept. The room was a mess, with snack wrappers and drink containers scattered around, and a bad smell lingered in the air. It made me not even want to breathe. "This is filthy," I thought to myself. I blurted out, "This is filthy," without thinking, and my husband replied, "Right, that's why you should come and clean." His suggestion was absurd. He added, "Really, if you had apologized earlier, it wouldn't have gotten this bad. For $25 an hour, you could clean up. It's a good deal, and you'd make some money too." He smiled, clearly thinking I was desperate for cash. I didn't see any point in arguing, and just wanted to leave quickly. "I refuse. Please hand over my father's belongings now," I said firmly. He hesitated before saying, "It seems my mother accidentally threw them away." So that's what happened. While I wasn't entirely surprised, it was still disappointing. But this made my decision clear. I had nothing more to expect from this house or my husband. As I was about to leave, he blocked my way. "How annoying. Please move." "Wait, don't be mad. It's okay for you to come back, just you," he said. "Really? You're such a bother. You should have just complied. Listen, this is your last chance." "I don't understand. What are you dissatisfied with? If you need a maid, you should hire someone else." "Hey, don't get ahead of yourself. What can a part-time worker do?" he sneered. I felt insulted. It was ridiculous. Had he forgotten that I worked part-time because he didn't want me earning more? I had supported him so he could focus on his career, but now I was fed up with being looked down upon. "You're in the way," I said.
"What?"
I said, "You're in the way. You can't do anything with your meager salary." "What?" "Ask your beloved mother to clean." Stunned, my husband watched as I left the house. I felt lighter as I saw how much things had changed. I no longer felt any attachment to the house. Though I was disappointed that nothing was left of my father's belongings, it was better than being held captive by memories. The look of surprise on my husband's face was something to see. Now, I needed to get home quickly. My mother was waiting for me. Later, I received a job offer from the owner of the beauty salon where I used to work. It was for a mobile beauty service, providing home visits to clients who needed care and couldn't make it to the salon. I registered with the local government and began visiting homes upon request from the community. Sometimes, I also worked at care facilities. There are hairstylists who specialize in the service, and I was glad to join them. I also had regular customers at my own salon, so taking on this new job once a week seemed doable. However, I had my mother to consider. She couldn't be left alone. While she had been doing well lately, she didn't like going out much. One day, as I was thinking it over, my mother said, "Why not? I'll come with you and help out." At first, I thought of an assistant as someone training to be a hairstylist, but her idea was eye-opening. We could go out together. The doctor had said that staying active and engaging with others was important for preventing dementia. Instead of just worrying, I realized it was important to try new things, so I decided to take on the job a few times a week. When we visited clients, my mother helped with tidying up and chatting with them, acting as a great assistant. She was active and attentive, just like she used to be. No more absent-mindedness. Then one day, my husband showed up at the salon. "What did you come for?" I asked, feeling tense. It was inevitable that the location of my shop would become known, but I wondered if he was here to cause trouble. When would he stop being a nuisance? I positioned myself in front of my mother, ready to call the police if needed. He asked, "Could you give me a shampoo and cut?" "Don't fool around. What do you want?" I replied. He sighed and said, "I received an eviction notice from the real estate agent."
"What?
"You sold that land and house, didn't you?" I asked, confused. "I didn't do anything like that. They thought it was an abandoned house and sent a cleaning crew." This is no joke. I suddenly realized what had happened. It was my mother's doing. She had either let go of the family home or completed the ownership change she mentioned before. But wait, the only thing my mother signed was that suspicious contract. Did he really think homemade documents could settle everything? I was shocked by his incompetence. "Give it back." "That's my house," he demanded. "It seems the demolition has already started." "I don't know anything about that," I replied calmly. "Are you going to kick my elderly parents out of their home?" he asked. "After you took my mother's house?" "I don't care," I said firmly. "Then I'll make this house my own." Owning a salon and having a maid isn't that perfect. He arrogantly opened the door to the house attached to the shop. "Don't enter without permission," I warned him. I was about to call the police when my husband suddenly calmed down. He noticed my father's leather shoes by the entrance and asked with a trembling voice, "What's this? Is there someone new already?" That morning, I had taken the shoes out of the box and decided to polish them. He probably didn't realize they belonged to my father. Given that this was the same husband who didn't notice when I cut my hair by 8 inches, it wasn't surprising he didn't remember whose shoes they were. "Are you cheating on me, even though I'm still here?" he demanded, turning red with anger. "Huh? We've been separated for a while."
Who are you talking about?"
I replied, amused by his reaction. "I can't forgive this," he shouted. "Can't forgive what?" I thought to myself. What is he thinking? I couldn't help but smirk. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad to give him a little scare. "Are you ready to face what's coming?" I asked, staring intently at his face. "You should know that those expensive shoes suggest that half-heartedness will lead to painful consequences." He started sweating, his eyes darting around in panic. I couldn't believe how easily rattled my prideful husband was. "You're awfully quiet. What's wrong? Should I call him now?" I teased. "Call who? Is someone here?" he stammered. "Hey darling, can you come here, please?" I called out casually. Without another word, my husband bolted out the door like a whirlwind. My mother covered her face, trying to suppress her laughter. "Look how fast he can run away," she said, and we both started laughing together. The tension melted away, and I felt a sense of relief. "I wonder who you called," my mother said, still giggling. "Your acting was marvelous." I joined in her laughter. I doubted my husband would ever come back. "Thank you, Dad, for your help," I thought, looking at the shoes. It turned out that it was my mother who had arranged for our former house to be sold. I asked, "You wouldn't really go through with changing the ownership, would you? Did you know everything?" "Of course," she replied, without hesitation. Signing that document couldn't possibly have any effect. That was the plan from the start. I just thought it might be difficult if they knew about the dementia, so I was just watching how things would go. I was surprised that she was aware of her cognitive impairment. But then she added, "Lately, my mind has become clearer, as if the fog has lifted. I think I'm getting better. I still forget things sometimes, but I've always been that way." However, easily giving up our home wasn't something I wanted to do. But it was actually your father's idea to sell the house. The plan was to sell it after you both moved out, and then move to a convenient apartment near the station. Life doesn't always go as planned, does it? "That's true," I agreed. Thinking back, the signs of dementia began to show when my mother became more housebound. She's naturally energetic and thrives on interacting with people, staying active both mentally and physically. "I hope she continues to stay healthy." She then said, "I've earned my own pocket money as your assistant, so you don't need to worry about me for a while." As for my ex-husband and his parents, they tried to return to their old home, but the eldest son and his wife wouldn't let them. Considering my mother-in-law's difficult personality, she disliked cleaning and my self-centered, unhygienic ex-husband. It's no surprise they were refused. The house was already in the eldest son's name, so they couldn't do anything about it. Their relationship seems to have fallen apart, with each blaming the other. My ex-husband was blamed for losing their place to live. Out of necessity, he bought a used house with a high mortgage, but knowing his savings and income, it seemed like a reckless decision. He'll have to live frugally to pay off the debt. The new home already looked like a mess, and they had just moved in. They even got scolded by the strict neighborhood association president for stacking garbage bags in front of the house, which made them unpopular with the neighbors. They really need to clean up. Honestly, it's none of my business and I don't care much, but I hope they don't bother others. His parents are still healthy, so they should work to support their low-income son. If they don't want to be scolded, they'll at least have to clean up after themselves. It could even help prevent dementia.